Quotations from myself, segment 77, quotation number 938. Man can never get used to injustice. He can only become, provided willingness on his part, unjust himself, and thus derive at least the dubious satisfaction from getting even. 939. The easiest way to ingratiate oneself with others is by pretending to follow their helpful advice and to do it as convincingly as possible without actually hurting oneself in the process. For to act upon someone else's well-meaning counsel is tantamount to acknowledging, if only tacitly, the superiority of his judgment, which is a kind of flattery nobody can resist. 940. Whoever I am, both psychologically and ideologically, can be to a large extent attributed to being brought up in one of those not untypical working-class families which resign to their thankless lot in life and derive their only pride and satisfaction from the ability to support themselves by hard and honest labor and by deeply ingrained knowledge that they are the salt of the earth and those above them is but a parasitic scum. 941. Whether rich or poor, one has to know how to handle money, though the means and the ends in each case are, understandably, quite different. The poor have to learn, and the sooner the better, how to survive on as little as they have, yet maintaining some resemblance of independence and dignity. As for the rich, the abundance of money presents an opportunity and challenge to find various ways of spending as much as possible, and then some more, in order to show to the selected few how sophisticated, discriminate, and ultimately conspicuous consumers they are, and thus proving to those who still need the proof that they deserve unquestionably their fortune, if for nothing else than for possessing superbly unique knowledge of spending it with class. 942. The other day I saw a photograph of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, a husband and wife accused of kidnapping, raping, and torturing, and finally killing two teenage girls. At the moment I look at the picture of Paul and Carla, I realize that despite of the deluge of information provided daily by the newspapers, radio and television about this horrible case, essentially I learned nothing from it. For what I saw in the photos were two healthy and beautiful young people, their faces lightened up by happy kind of smiles, not the slightest trace of anything which could even remotely suggest the malice, the evil, the murder. And I was struck immediately by these unsettling questions, which all of us are compelled from time to time to grapple with. What do we really know about each other? For I can also recall the faces of some of the people I occasionally meet on the street of Toronto, namely the derelicts and the homeless, the ex-con and planning to commit the crime, the marginalized and outcasts, the drug pushers and pimps, etc., etc. The unmistakably familiar tales of suffering and deprivation of crime and punishment, of inflicted upon themselves and others destruction, could be read without any difficulty on their faces, which make one's apprehensive, which makes one apprehensive and fearful, constantly threatened with a potential explosion of anger and violence. And yet I feel with almost inexplicable certainty that none of them is capable of what this young and lovely couple on the photograph did. And so the question still remains stuck in my head, begging and demanding the answers. What do we really know about each other? (943) The obvious contradiction between the predestination, the belief that the eternal destiny of a person is predetermined by God's unchangeable decree, and the free will, the power and ability of human mind to choose a course of action without being subjected to restraints imposed by divine predetermination, had been explained by numerous theologians through the century of Christianity, more or less satisfactory, at least for those who want to maintain their faith, as a magnanimous act of the omnipotent God to allow essentially powerless man to have some degree of control over the variation of the ways he can choose, yet arriving finally at the predetermined point. Thus, while God's sovereignty remains absolute and his resolve unshaken throughout eternity, man through his own action can vary the means, but not the end. Yet at the same time, no less obvious and perhaps even more striking contradiction between the predestination and the power of prayer, done for the sake of requesting something of a deity who had presumably already determined one's fate from eternity to eternity, never has attracted, to the best of my knowledge, the same attention of theologians. Though the resolution of this particular contradiction is probably even more crucial to maintaining of faith than that of a previous one. For the act of a prayer, which is a petition for oneself and the others, presupposes that man can change God's mind as far as man's destiny is concerned. It shows God as one who isn't searching his resolve and is capable of being swayed one way or another by man's plea. This not only destroys the idea of predestination, but what is even worse, makes man more powerful than God. For if God answers man's prayer, then speaking strictly philosophically, the one who originates the act, man by praying, is more powerful than one who reacts to it, God answering. In the act of praying, man becomes a cause, while God an effect. Man is an active, and God is a passive force, which overthrows the fundamental for any religion concept of supremacy of the omnipotent God. Also, a God who listens to man's prayer and acts accordingly is not an omniscient God either. For the act of listening implies that God doesn't know something which man knows, which logically impossible for the one who, as omniscient, supposed to know everything. It is clear, therefore, that unless the contradiction between predestination and power of prayer is resolved, it will continue to undermine belief in God's omnipotence and omniscience. And since a God who is neither, is not, at least in Judaism and Christianity, the God at all, the faith itself. On the other hand, for how long the religion in which God doesn't answer man's supplication is going to last? Hence is the dilemma, to resolve or not to resolve this contradiction. Each way there lies a threat to the faith, and perhaps to choose neither is only practical solution to the church which wants to preserve its existence and maintain its relevance. 944. It is amazing how some people, and especially the women at a certain age, are actually proud of behaving foolishly, considering it mistakenly as a sign of usefulness. 945. As far as morality is concerned, one does not have to be a Christian or even a religious person to follow this excellent and universal precept from the Gospel of Matthew 7:12. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And yet, even those who remember it by heart seldom live accordingly. Most are preoccupied with their own welfare to such an extent that they have little time and inclination to think of anybody else. When on rare occasions they do, it usually happens in a conflicting situation, when the choice whether to do what is good for me or for the others has to be made, and when the satisfying both selfishness and altruism seems impossible. Needless to say, selfishness wins again and again. It is quite natural, therefore, that such people can hardly imagine any other impetus for immoral behavior Sorry, I was interrupted by the telephone now, so let me resume. It is quite natural, therefore, that such people can hardly imagine any other impetus for moral behavior than the fear of punishment. And since they represent the majority of humanity, any religion that considers morality as its integral part has to deal with it. Hence, for instance, the moral paradox of Christianity, which, while offering this famous quotation from Matthew as a guiding rule, has to ultimately rely on the fear of God, the final judge and executioner of eternal damnation, to convince the believers of the importance of moral behavior.